Kahu, can you hear me? Well, when we start, will you be happy to do the opening karakia, even though you're on Zoom? No, you're not. You're all right. We'll just let Councillor Skinner get his cup of tea, coffee, and come in. And I'm going to ask Alec to open with karakia, and just let you know we've got 3 people on Zoom with Councillor Paki, Talit, and Mr. Wilson. So we've got you on Zoom. I hope you can all hear me. If you give us a thumbs up if you can. Yep. So all 3 of you can hear us, so that's good. Over to you, Alec.
Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki wahu, tuia te here tangata, ka ronga te pau, ka ronga te ao, umi e, hui e, tai ki e.
All right, so just
He'll take the lead with this.
Yeah, he'll be quicker than me.
He does move very quick when he needs to, so yeah,
that's good. Well, I don't, and we're working today on my birthday.
Happy birthday.
So that's fine. And I won't tell you how old I am, but the simple thing is we had to do this because we had to get this done by the end of this year. So apologies. We've got, I don't think, any. We haven't heard from our iwi representative. We haven't heard from our iwi rep. No, well, she might be late. So anyway, we won't record anything. Order of business stays the same, as I understand it. Any new interests? None at all. Public forum, there's none. There's nobody here. Confirmation of minutes of the meeting of the 2nd of August. Would someone like to move? Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Skinner. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right. Draft business plan for 24-25, and I will tell you we had some problems in Tasman with our connections yesterday, and we ended up with just the confidential agenda from a certain time. So I got all that read, but some of this other stuff, we were in a workshop and we missed it. But that's okay. So Brad, over to you.
Through the chair, I'll front this one. All right. The actual draft business plan is 25-26 that we're referring to, not 24-25. Yeah, the title is incorrect, so my apologies for that. So we're talking about the draft business plan prepared for the 25-26 financial year period. The business plan is based on year 2 of the activity management plan that's been approved by the 2 councils. It has some minor differences, and there are some telemetry charges that were included in the operational budget that were previously not included. It's been updated to include inflationary pressures, and it also includes one consent requirement that we have on our discharge consent, which is a cyclic activity that we have to do every 6 years. So it's a management technology review, and so we need to include the cost for that. So it's a review of the technologies we're using and whether or not the activities that we are doing on the island still meet best practice, essentially. And that's a requirement, the consent we do every 6 years. So that's the only real changes from an operational perspective. There's one change from a capital perspective that we've included, which is adding some additional funding in for, again, a consent-related activity for the biofilter and stormwater actions at the Rabbit Island biosolids discharge facility. There's some options around whether or not we defer other expending to accommodate that, or whether we add it to the budget. Currently, we've recommended adding it as an additional item to the budget, compared to the AMP. And essentially, that's the summary of that report. Open to questions.
So I'm sure there's some questions, and I've got some, but they're more financial.
Sorry, add one thing. There is an updated page 33 of the agenda, which is a new table showing the different items of expenditure and the way where they sit. Again, happy to answer questions about that. It's essentially outlining what we're spending money on, over the next 10 years, which was part of the activity management plan, and this relates to our first, 3 years.
So if no one else, I'll start, and it's probably directed at Andrew. So when we reported the previous year, when you reported to Tasman District, and one of our councillors who has an accounting and financial background, in fact, I think she was the financial manager for DOC, so high level. She said we had a deficit, and that was because we'd had very low inflows. I think summarised it. So Andrew, going forward, and I think the manager explained it as if you use the inflows from 1 year, budget for your next in some ways. So to estimate what you think you'll get the next year. So Andrew, if you could explain that, and just, I think it's useful for board members because it does impact. And then this 3 months, we've actually had quite a wet period, but it started after the 1st of July, as I understand it. And I note that through, I see how wet it is at the golf club because it hasn't stopped raining. So if you could just comment on that for me.
Sure. So the income for the business unit is based substantially, apart from some few minor exceptions, is based on the trade waste agreements that we have with our 4 major customers. It's got 2 parts to it. One is a capital charge for the quota that they buy, the access to the assets, and so that's because it's capital intensive. That's the bigger part of the bill. Then there's a variable charge to recover the operations expenditure. So that is then, under the agreement, that is recovered on the proportion actually received during the year. In the interim, because we don't know during the year what we're going to receive, we charge the flows and loads coming in based on a unit rate that is calculated using the previous year's loads and flows. Okay, so there's an interim charge during the year with a wash up to at the end of the year to get based on the actual expenditure and the actual flows and loads. last year what happened was the prior year had a very high flows in particular, and as a result, the unit charges had a lower because they had a bigger divisor. And so we under-recovered during the year. That was signalled all through the year that that was happening. And then at the end of the year, of course, we needed to recover the operations expenditure. And so there was quite a large, one of the larger charges that we've ever had at the end of the year to catch up. So last year, we had the low flows, which are used for the unit rates, the interim unit rates for this new year. So big bills are going to go out this year, and there should be, as long as we keep within budget, which, as Philip pointed out last meeting, is actually the critical issue. Well, it's the more critical issue. How big is the cake? And we're confident that we're going to be able to keep within that. So there's going to be big charges come through this year, and then there'll be a wash up. The manager is in discussion with the customers about whether it's better to change the interim charge basis from last year to either a weighted an average from a period of time beforehand to try and smooth it out so that you're not getting these big wash-ups at the end. But because the trade waste agreements are an agreement with 4 parties, we really practically need to get all 4 to agree. I don't actually think that would be a problem because it's only an interim charge. And as Philip pointed out again last meeting, it's only an interim charge during the year. It's the full year charges that eventually matter. Does that?
Yeah, no, that sums it up. So some years you can pay too much partway through and then get some back. Yeah. Other years you pay too little far through and you end up with a bill. All right. So
and that becomes quite obvious as we go through the trends. But you could have a big weather event towards the end of the year. So you've got a picture going one way and suddenly there's a big bill goes out and it reverses. But in the end, the total for the year is based on the actual plus the flows and loads received during the year.
That's useful for me, and I just wanted to have that explained because it went through. I've got one other question.
Can I make a comment? Yep. So one of the and I think it's useful that it's been raised. And one of the discussions that I've been having with the general manager is exactly that. So in terms of the trade waste agreements that each of the 4 contributors have, there's an allowance in there, or as part of those agreements, to look at a review of those. And I said to Nathan, I think it was last week or the week before, that I think it's probably timely for the 4 contributors to sit down the table to re-look at those trade waste agreements and just see whether we could perhaps, as Andrew indicated and as Philip indicated as well, that we do something over the year rather than just having something big hit us in the wash up at the end of the year. The general manager was open to that, and I think it's just the start of a discussion, but also just to look at those trade waste contracts and to have a review of them and to do that with all 4 contributors. As Andrew said, we need everybody in the room, and I think it's just a re-look which the contract allows, but we just need to sometimes look with cleaner, fresher eyes. We have, people around the table, and we should just do that.
Well, from my perspective, the councils in this position are customers. So they are one of our 4 customers as well as our 2 industrial users. So to me, it makes some sense to have that discussion. So the manager's nodding, so he's not saying it's a bad thing. So I see that as being a benefit, because otherwise you get some big fluctuations. And I remember when I first came on the board and Philip was talking, this would be a number of years ago, and it was about making sure there was no surprises. So that's why I know you talk early, but you could still end up paying a lot of capital up front or a lot of money up front, and then you get it back later, which doesn't help with budgets. So if you can work out some way of smoothing that without causing problems, I think we're open to that. Well, I've got one other question, and it's of you, Andrew. So when I look at the capital program, and Kahu, I've got a couple of people out there with questions. So Talit and Kahu, so that's good. But I'll just ask one on the capital. So your capital is loan funded, and we get it at the Nelson City rate, as I understand it, which will be the local or similar to the local government rate, or maybe slightly more. The local government funding agent, but my understanding is it's mainly capital is loan funded.
That's correct. Particularly new capital. So we do have depreciation funding, which is, you know, it's not insignificant because it is a capital based, is the largest driver of costs. But it is true that it's funded, particularly new capital, by loans. The interest rate that the board pays to the two councils so the Nelson Regional Sewerage Business Unit borrows from the two councils, and the interest rate is based on the 3-year swap rate plus the margin that Nelson City Council has with their Westpac facility. So that's in the contract agreement. Industries then pay a small margin on top of that to reflect that they're not owners and the owners are carrying risk. Okay. So the councils then fund those loans to us, which is effectively an internal loan through both of them largely use the local government funding agency. So any difference in the rates between what we pay them and what they pay externally is borne by the two councils because they manage their own treasury independently. Mm-hmm.
And with what I'm reading, the swap rate will be heading down.
Yes, which brings to a point, we don't have a reliable forecast of what the swap rate's going to be. And so what we do use in the business plan as a proxy for that is the Treasury risk-free rate, which seems to approximate it, and it's an external independent rate that we can use. What we have used here is Treasury's view at June, and we've done that historically, but if rates move from there, I think when we review this in 3 months' time, because we're actually talking about starting 9 months out plus another year. So, yeah. So I think it would be good to just review that to see whether it's fit for purpose when we come back in 3 months' time. So I'll just give a heads up on that, and maybe even again when we review it finally.
Okay, that's good because I'm not sure if Nelson City Council gets a financial briefing from our Treasury people, but we do from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they spend an hour or so with council talking about what they think was going forward, and that was before the Reserve Bank dropped the rates. But I see the Americans have dropped their interest rates as well, so I see, you know, those swap rates going down. Just from what I read, both internally and internationally.
Yeah, my comment would be that the 3-year swap rate's already taken that. And from what I've read of the article I read on the American rate dropping is that the market had already priced that in. And yeah.
Which is good. So Kahu had a question and it's been answered. So thank you for that, Andrew. I think it just helps to understand because it helps when you look at these capital expenditure. Talit, you've got a question of the manager or of the finance manager?
Kiora, it's about the forecast, 3 years forecast, which is for renewals and for upgrades. So a general question is it the forecast which is matching, is it matching with the activity plan, the approved budget, or is it different? The other one is, if I see at renewals, line item pump station and rising mains for renewals only, I can see this year is 2.1 mil. Next year it's dropping drastically to 376K only, and then it's again ramping up to 2.6 mil. So is there any reason for that? Thanks.
So through the chair, the renewals and the capital are generally in alignment with the activity management plan that we generated. I can't answer the specifics, and the details of around a specific number. What the way it's the renewals is forecast is based on the condition assessments and the expected life of certain assets, and where we have a section of assets that we would expect to be renewed, we would be obviously programming it for that year, and that then gets reviewed each year based on condition assessments like whether we need to do that asset upgrade or that renewal or not. There will be a period here where the rising main duplication will be completed, and so some of these actions in the 24-25 year would be related to renewals in association with that rising main upgrade. And then there's a period after that where we would expect not to do so much. And then some of the pumps and other aspects would be needing to be done. And there's another section of work where we're looking to try to rehabilitate one of the existing lines. And that's where the bigger funding would come in the 26-27 year. So that's generally based on our expectation of life and condition assessments of those assets.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim and Barry, no questions. I've got to say, we're getting. Oh, Philip, you've got a question? Sorry. You need to unmute yourself, Philip.
Just did. Yeah, I just tried to do that. It didn't. Just in relation to renewals and other capital expenditure, when do they actually get priced into the charging? Is it next year, or it's done, or as per budget?
So the way that those assets are bought in is essentially when we're doing a project, until such time as that project is completed and usable, that is considered work in progress. So it's not we don't start charging until the project is actually able to be done. And I think that's generally the next year after the completion of that project. So Andrew would have to confirm that.
Andrew's nodding, so he's confirmed it. You don't have to pay for it as a customer, Philip, until you're actually using it. Yeah, I thought you'd be happy with that, being a business representative. You never like to pay for anything until it's delivered. And I've got to say, I don't have a problem with that either. Because some people don't deliver what they say. Andrew?
Thanks. To the chair, the figures here were done under quite a lot of pressure, and the forecast there is just from the annual, from the AMP, and it doesn't include the carryovers of unspent budget from the previous year, which we will fix up for the next one. We've been rather busy with annual accounts. Yeah, page 27. So we will update that. Because the carryover report hasn't been approved yet. That comes in later. The other thing is we are carrying a large amount of work in progress with the duplicate pipeline at the moment, which is quite significant. So this year's, I expect us, because the funding for that has been carried by the two councils, so it was 18 million at the end of June. So that's going to impact on the bottom line for this current year because we're not recovering from our customers.
But we will in time, and
we will in time.
That's been a very important project. And I've got to say, from a layman, it's those contractors have done a particularly good job. There was some disruption to traffic at that roundabout and that, but if you went through the site, and I went around it a number of times, they looked very, very efficient, and I would say it appeared to be a very safe site from the outside.
Yeah, through the chair, we're comfortable with the performance. It has been done well. We expect the charges for that pipeline to occur next year, because it will be completed and be in service in the next financial year. So.
So we've got a question coming from Councillor Paki, but having trouble with the system. So we'll see if we get the question in a moment. So the other one project that I've looked, and I had trouble reading this, is just that reuse water, sending it in time to Best Island. When will we start making some progress on that? And it's probably a question for the manager or for the operations manager.
So through the chair, the Best Island irrigation is currently, the bulk of the money is available. If you look in the green line, it's 4.5 million sitting in year 6 of the activity management plan capital expenditure. That being said, we're embarking on the application of the reuse of water for Bell Island. There's a series of smaller projects going on for reusing water in the forest on Bell Island. And there's also obviously consent requirements for the reuse of water on Best Island, so that the consent application goes on earlier. We have installed, as part of our overarching program, a series of ducts through beneath the estuary between Best Island and Bell Island, so that we can bring the reused water across easily. So that's all completed. So we're in a position now that program should be, fairly simple, subject to the resource consent to be implemented.
Well, thanks for that, because I'm just very conscious of statements that I've made in the past about reuse and the investment we made in buying Best Island, and we need to reuse as much of our treated wastewater going forward. And Philip knows that, because I've had meetings with him, several meetings, but we're now using it for irrigation. Correct. At Green Acres Golf Course, and I had the pleasure of visiting that golf course recently. So, that is a good use story that we need to keep telling. And as a country in New Zealand, we need to reuse our wastewater rather than sending it to sea, because water is a precious resource. This is a bit of a hobby horse of mine. And just wastewater going to sea, when you look around the rest of the world with bigger populations, we can use it, but you actually don't have to have as big a population, because you can use it for other things. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for Nathan. Quite some time back now, we've got a spare pipe across the estuary from Bell Island to Monaco. How are we progressing on getting that back that way now?
Yeah, through the chair, we, as the joint committee will know, the regional sewage business unit has been installing reuse pipe work as part of the major rising main upgrade. So we have that pipe work going in. There are a few gaps in that system, so we can't currently use that pipe work. The reason we do it, and we basically have a philosophy that where we are doing a pipe upgrade, we install a reused pipe at the same time, because it's very cheap, to put another pipe in the same trench. It's just paying for the extra piece of pipe. The intent is to link those pieces up, and so that we can get reuse water from Bell Island to other locations within and Saxonsfield being one of the key ones we're looking at. We're working with the Saxonsfield committee to look at that, and there is some funding between the Saxonsfield committee and the NRSBU to try and start the process of looking at how much we might be able to use and how that would be used at Saxonsfield. So
that's good. So any other?
Yeah, one. I'll read. So the question from Councillor Paki is, inflationary influence is mentioned a number of times throughout the report. What is our current inflation calculation versus next year's forecast, and how well did previous calculations align with the current report?
I'll pass this one to Brad because he was involved in doing that calculation. So.
Thank you, through the chair. We've used the Stats NZ provided inflationary figures for generating the updated business plan finances, bearing in mind that we are using actual CPI adjustments for the year to date and an estimate of what we believe CPI might be for the next 9 months before the business plan actually kicks in. So those numbers that are included in here is a total of 8.1%.
Right. So yeah, that's 2 years. So I sit on another committee that sees tender prices. And what I would say is there's more competition in the market than there has been in the past. And I'm seeing some nods from both Brad and Mike and probably Phil. So that has helped because there's been a slowdown. And when businesses are looking for work, we get more competition. So I think the inflation that we've had in the last couple of years is certainly reducing in the construction industry. And I'm seeing that in reports. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I might be here. I mean, one of the key things about the activity management plans is all the budgets are uninflated. So we obviously are trying to make sure that we're recognising the change in cost over time in our business plan to reflect the difference between when we did the activity management plan and the current date. So that's essentially why there's an inflationary aspect in here, and we're using the CPI numbers to do that.
Construction inflation is quite different from CPI, yeah, isn't it? If we've got no more questions, we've got one motion to move on with the one I've got here.
Yep.
Is that we've received the report for, it should be 25-26, shouldn't it?
It should be 25-26.
On the screen.
On the screen. Yep. All right.
And on the screen.
I've got 3 screens in front of me. As usual, it is challenging. So this screen, it's item 6. Are you happy to move that, Councillor Skinner?
Yeah. Can I say very happy to move or second it to receive?
Seconded, Councillor Dowler. Well, I've got some people on the screen. Right. I'm going to put that motion. If there's no other questions, there aren't. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
I've got ayes and thumbs up, so that's good. Against, carried. So that's that. Now, next. Annual report is what I've got here. Right. And my date here says 23-24.
That is correct.
All right. So that's the one.
So this one, yeah,
that's right.
This annual report is a summary of essentially the actions and what we did in the 23-24 financial year. And we had a successful year. There are a couple of things that weren't quite as good. One of them was obviously that we did the financing that didn't go quite as smoothly, but just because of that, which we've already discussed. And then we had one overflow related from one of the pump stations related to a storm event where the pumps got blocked up by rag during that event and couldn't keep up with the flow. And we had 2 leaks from the wastewater system from some fittings that were corroded. We've implemented actions to mitigate those. Health and safety was good during the year. Only a number of minor incidents and a lot of hazard identifications were going on. Capital expenditure was good. Well, there is, however, a carryover that we're requesting as another report on this agenda. The treatment plant treated wastewater to the required standards for the entire year. We did not need to discharge outside of our discharge specifications during the year in terms of flow or characteristics. And we obviously implemented a large portion of the rising main upgrades and are on track to have that completed this current year. So we also got the Green Acres Golf Course treated wastewater irrigation implemented, and so that's now available for ongoing use. And that's another key success for the year. So, as in conclusion, it was a good year. We had a little bit of an issue around the finances, which was probably the biggest issue.
And that was fully explained at the Tasman District Council by yourself, and people were happy with it. And I think if you can work with our customers, and we might come up with a slightly better system to help those fluctuations in the future, that will be useful. I must say, I attended the meeting with our nearby residents, with you and Brad, and I got positive feedback, and I haven't had phone calls at Christmas. So, when you can go to a meeting with our nearest residents that only live less than about 500 metres away, and they're happy with the work that we're doing, that is a bonus. So that's very important. What I will say is we were hoping to visit the plant on the 8th, because that fitted the tides, but I have a commitment that day for a plan change for Tasman District. So we're doing the meeting on the 15th of November. The problem is the tides don't work to visit the plant. But we need to arrange a visit for the board members as soon as possible, because there's been quite a bit of work done. And I think that would be a good thing to do. And even if we do it when we're not having a meeting, we just go out there and spend an hour.
Oh, absolutely. I think either way, I think the committee needs to actually go and have a look at
There's a new building.
It looks fantastic and well done. I do need to reiterate what you just said in terms of the work that the guys are doing out there, in terms of achieving the consensus. It's really good. Well done.
Yeah. And look, if how we monitor odour and other things certainly has a big, and if we can keep the nearest neighbours on side, we're doing something right. So that's, and when I first started on here, we didn't have that relationship, so it's much better. But the reuse of the water is something that will help us with our iwi people around the district going forward. And if you think back when we had our consent hearing, that was the one thing that they really don't like, that we discharge to the sea. But if you look right around New Zealand, that's what's happens. And we can, my hobby horse, if we can reuse the water, even if it's with more than one customer and more than one function, it just makes sense to me. So bear that in mind. So any questions at this point? And Kahu might have one. If you've got one, Kahu, just give me a thumbs up, and then you can send it through. But if you don't, fine.
Oh, controlling that.
Yeah. All right. So there's no questions. I think Kahu. I'll just wait to see if Kahu's sending one through. No, he's shaking his head. He's fine. All right. So we've got a motion here. Oh, Councillor Skinner's got one.
Yeah, quick one. And you touched on 7.3, page 38. 7.4, we've had a few businesses like Enza leave, and we've obviously done very well during the year. Is that an issue that's going to cause us having at least customer base to split the costs? Is that an issue going forward, or it's just part and parcel of
Tasman's growing?
Yeah, through the chair. When Enza left, it did remove, they were a small portion of our overall flow, but they were more significant in terms of the load that they discharged to the facility. It did mean that our growth, essentially it gave us ability to accept additional growth from our customer or other customers. And so that was, in some ways it wasn't significantly harmful. It did mean that we under-recover slightly against our capital charge, so that they were no longer contributing to that. And one of the things that we are looking at doing, we have made an offer to our other customers whether they want to purchase some of that capacity that's available, and there's ongoing discussion around that. So essentially resell that capacity to the other customers. And that's then once that capacity is reallocated, then that funding would essentially be done. But at the present time, that capacity essentially sits with the regional sewage business unit, rather than being hasn't been sold at this time.
And the other one, I don't want to look out. I'm looking outside of the scope because I realise this is the performance of a year gone by, but it also helps me to reflect on some of that strategic thinking and investment that we've done over the last 2, 3, 4, 6 years, which I've been very impressed with, and it's held us in good stead. But Richmond's growing incredibly well.
Not just Richmond.
Well, it's actually going beyond Richmond, going out to Appleby the other day, and you keep finding more and more development happening there. Happy times. But what we're doing here, there's a lot of our wastewater goes, we'll say our Nelson going that way. Everything on track. I know we've invested very well and we continue to, but looking at the performance, are there any sort of flags coming up in just the way anything unbalanced?
No,
we're trajectorying as far as investment and where we're going. So I don't want to go off topic. I know
Got you, Philip. Don't worry.
This is more what we've achieved.
Essentially, everything is on track. We're obviously investing in our conveyancing system, getting the wastewater from Tasman catchment to the wastewater treatment plant. That will lead on to some requirements to do some additional works in the plant. Obviously, once you get more and get bigger peaks coming in, then you've got to deal with that. We've got some renewals that need to go on in the plant, but the general investment profile is matching what we have put in our long-term and plans and our activity management plans too. And so there is always going to be a decision point where the flows reach a certain point where we need to do further investment in the conveyancing system to go. There's a limit to what we can bring through our existing pipework, and there's a limit. At some point, we'll end up having to put another section of pipework essentially from Richmond to the Bell Island plant in what we call the clockwise direction. So that is a big expense, and obviously we want to delay that as long as we can. And the delaying that means working with principally the council customers to try to mitigate peaking factors on their stormwater. So the parts of that activity are continuing to renew the existing pipelines to allow them to convey the water very well, but also putting some peaking storage and some other aspects to allow us to do maintenance. And so all of those are in progress and going well.
And quickly, and thank you for that. This has been very helpful, especially looking back on this and looking forward. And I've been championing very hard in regards to even new developments, as you know, Ken, that water, what do you call it, infiltration of water coming into the system where it's not designed to be. And I think we've solved a lot of that. Some of that has been a bit of education with our community. So it's a two-way thing. Are those all tracking well?
We obviously work with our council customers all the time. So every year they give us a new update of what their future demand would be, and over the next few years, the 10 years and or like 2035 and then 2050 sort of period. So we're always using the information our customers are giving us. We don't do that work ourselves. We have to rely on the councils themselves to do that forward estimates. So the accuracy of that is always held by, and the knowledge base is held by our customers, not by ourselves.
Cool. They'll keep us on our toes as governance if we need to sort of pass it on, that we need to do a push for our community to make sure we're not putting a load unnecessarily on through going through the gully traffic and so forth. Yeah. Very good. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Right, I've got two other questions. So Mike was first and then Philip. So Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You'll obviously talk about growth too, won't you?
I hadn't intended to, but we can do.
I've sat on a panel where we approved 300 extra houses or 300 extra lots in one of our suburbs further south of Richmond recently.
Yeah, that's all going through the plan change and the FDS at the moment, and there's still ongoing discussions with that. Yeah, because there are other areas that are not in there that are trying to come into the area as well. So council going to have to make a decision on how far that growth goes.
Yeah, I know that. So the plan change for Wakefield has been completed. So that's another 300 sections.
It is, yeah. Just coming back to the quota system, I might have misheard Nathan, but you said that surplus sits with the regional sewerage. That's not quite correct. The surplus, any surplus capacity, is actually shared out and paid for by the councils. For example, for many years, the we at TDC didn't have the capacity because of the Beach Road pump station, but we paid for the capacity of the pipeline all the way through. And also similar has happened with some of the upgrades where when ends are pulled out, for example, there was surplus capacity there, both conveyance and treatment. And that was then shared out, and the two councils then share that surplus capacity 50-50 and pay for it, because someone's got to pay for it. It can't just sit there, and because it's actually used and we have to pay off the loans for the capital.
So
Andrew might be able to comment a bit more on that.
Yeah, Andrew might want to comment more on that. My understanding is it sits within RSPU, but is essentially owned by, that means it's held by the two councils as owners, not as users. So and that's what I meant by sitting within RSPU. It's not allocated to the customers it's allocated to the owners of the business.
Yeah.
So Andrew, you might.
As chair, I'll just make a comment that the councils have two roles. One, we're owners, and two, we're also customers. So the engineering people sit here as customers generally, because you use the facility. We sit here as in governance as councillors, as owners. So the two are different, and councils have two roles, basically. We're both owners and we are customers.
They were actually adamant, the three users, the industrial users at the time were adamant they would not pay for quota they did not own. And the agreement then was that council will pay for that surplus quota.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So Andrew, do you want to just comment?
Yeah, I think we've got a wee confusion with terms here, particularly between the owners and customers. So where it sits at the moment is NZ's flow has been sold to Nelson City Council as customer. The load currently is owned by the business unit, so the two councils as owners. So we're not charging them in their monthly charges for that quota. It reduces the surplus, our income, and therefore the surplus that's shared 50-50 by the two councils.
All right, so that's fine. Philip, you've got a question?
I actually had a comment in relation to the question earlier on, the risks associated with industry pulling out and what that exposes the councils to. And I would just point out that it's really crucial that that the wastewater treatment is cost effective for industry. Industry, particularly, both Alliance and Nelson Pine Industries are competing on an international market for a substantial portion of their production. And if we're not competitive internationally, then we'll go under. And that's not an idle threat, because if you have a look at what's happened recently around the country, Winstone Pulp Industries, where I used to work, is now going to close. And that's a reasonable sized pulp mill in the Central North Island, processing wood from the Central North Island region. And there's also another plant up in Penrose that's going to shut down, basically because the cost of production was not competitive internationally, and so the businesses have to make a business decision on the basis of that. And the same so the other risk is that the cost of treatment is too high relative to alternatives that we could do. And so the other risk in terms of losing income for the council is that we could come up with a way of treating, which means we don't need to have treatment at the wastewater plant. And the combined cost of water and wastewater are coming very close to the point where the economics of some significant alternative treatments would remove a substantial portion of the waste is viable. So I just highlight that point. I think that that the model that we've had in terms of charging and the way in which the NRSPU has been run have been really good in terms of keeping costs under control and meeting environmental requirements at the same time. And I think both those things are important, but I just highlight you can't necessarily rely on industry staying in there, either in terms of viability or in terms of alternative technology.
Look, I think there's some, as you've highlighted, Philip, there's some classic examples that have happened in the last few months, and most of those things are controlled by central government, not just by us. But we're very conscious of industry and the value that it adds in more ways than one.
That's a good point to raise.
Yeah. And but the cost of treatment is the cost of treatment, and we need to make sure we do it as cost effectively as we can. But we do have obligations to meet under the RMA in terms of environmental controls. So any other questions for this? Otherwise, we've got up on page 7 this to receive this report. No other questions. So have I got a mover? Councillor Dowler. I'll see if I've lost Councillor Paki at the moment.
I think he's there. He's just.
He's there. If he's happy to second, would he put up his hand?
He's just done it.
Yep, he's done that. So move Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Paki. We're to set this responsibility around. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, so that's that one. That was what?
The carryover report.
Yeah. One more report.
Yep. Yeah. And then, so what we'll do is we'll do this report. We'll do the carryover report, and then we'll have a break and move into confidential after that. So that gives a chance for the news media to leave, and then we have to change the Zoom over, I think, which takes a few minutes. So the carryover report, over to the manager.
No, through the chair, I'll leave this to the operations manager.
Thank you, through the chair. The report presents the status of capital works for the 23-24 year, as well as the amount of funds that was left over or unspent during the year that we wish to carry over to 24-25. As a comment, a significant component of the approximately $3.2 million proposed to carry over relates to renewals, of which $1.6 million is funds that are held presently to allow for future renewal of the aeration basin. So it's not a particularly large carryover value, all things considered. It's down on previous years, and we're expecting that to be even smaller at the end of the current financial year. Reasonable progress on a number of projects during the year, including the workshop facility, commencement of the sludge tank, replacement works, and in particular the rise and main duplication works have proceeded very well for the year. So we'll take any questions.
I'm happy to move.
I've got a mover, and I'm sure Councillor Dowler will second it. My comment is I always like smaller carryovers than larger, because as a ratepayer, when I've been rated for something and we haven't delivered it, it makes me grumpy. I like the carryover to be as close as possible because you rate for that loan. So it's probably slightly different here, but it's still an issue that you've rated that you're going to spend that money, and you need to be as close as we can to possible. And this is much better. And I know that the Tasman Council is getting better at it. Tasman District is getting better at it. Our carryovers are getting smaller as well, aren't they, Barry? They're closer to budget because maybe that's because people are looking for work and it's easier to get jobs done. And maybe we're getting better at the process. So it's moved and seconded. Any questions from on Zoom? None? All right. We'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Sorry, through the chair, before we do that, can we, I've just been notified that our EV representative is overseas and has offered her apologies for this meeting. So if we could just move and second that for the record, that would be...
Right. Move Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Skinner, that we accept the apologies of our EV representative for this meeting. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Then we'll break for a cup of tea. So we're going to move into confidential because of the commercial nature of business that we've got to do.
The move.
Moved councillor Skinner, seconded councillor Dowler. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, those on Zoom, we're going to, it'll be